The last sound I heard was the pilot's voice. It wasn't calm, it wasn't professional. It was a terrified scream that cut through the entire cabin. "Brace for impact!" The alarms were shrieking, "Terrain! Terrain!" But you couldn't hear them over the sound of metal tearing apart. I was in seat 24F. I looked out the window and the mountain wasn't in the distance. It was right there. The plane hit the rock and the world disappeared. There were 154 people on that flight. I am the only one who survived. It was Flight 417 from Seattle to Denver. Just another Tuesday. I'm an architect and I'd just finished a 3-day conference. It was one of those trips where every meeting ran long, the hotel pillows were too soft, and I just wanted to be home. I remember walking down the jet bridge, my shoulder bag heavy with a laptop and blueprints I never even opened. I found my seat, 24F, the window seat, right behind the wing. My favorite spot. I like seeing the flaps move. Watching the mechanics of the flight. It's comforting, usually. I settled in. I did the usual routine. Bag under the seat, seatbelt on, and I pulled out my phone to look at a picture of my daughter, Lily. She was 6. She'd made me a drawing of a flying car to take on my trip. I smiled and sent a text to my wife, Sarah. "Boarding now. Worn out. See you in a couple hours. Love you." Her reply came back instantly. "Love you. Lily refuses to sleep until you're home. Hurry." I typed. "Tell her." I'll read her 2 stories, put the phone into airplane mode, and leaned my head against the cold plastic of the window. The flight was smooth, utterly forgettable. That's what's so haunting about it. It was the definition of normal. The engines hummed. The flight attendants served drinks. I got a coffee and a small bag of pretzels. I remember staring at the pretzel, thinking it was too salty. A perfectly mundane thought. About an hour and a half in, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. Calm, professional. Exactly what you want to hear. "Folks, this is Captain Miller up front. We've started our initial descent into the Denver area. Looks like we've got a bit of snow hitting the foothills, so we might have a bumpy ride for the last 20 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." A bumpy ride. I'd heard that a dozen times. I looked out the window. The clear blue sky was gone, replaced by a thick milky white. We were in the clouds. This was normal for a Denver approach in winter. The turbulence started just as promised. A few light bumps. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on. But then it changed. This wasn't normal turbulence. It wasn't the gentle up and down. The plane dropped. It felt like an elevator cable snapping. My stomach flew up into my throat and my coffee, which was on the tray table, lifted up and floated for half a second before slamming back down. A woman gasped. Someone in the back gave a nervous laugh, but it died. Instantly. Then came the second drop, harder than the first. The plane didn't just drop, it lurched violently to the left. I was thrown against the window. My shoulder hit the wall hard. I looked at the wing. The engines sounded wrong. They weren't humming. They were screaming, straining. The whole plane was groaning. This was the sound of metal being pushed past its limit. The lights in the cabin flickered. Off, on, off. People were quiet. It was the silence of pure, collective fear. Everyone knew in that same instant that this was not normal. And then I heard it. From the front of the plane, coming from the cockpit, a new sound. It wasn't human. It was an electronic, repetitive, terrifyingly clear voice. Terrain, terrain. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement. I gripped the armrests. My knuckles were white. The man next to me was praying, his eyes squeezed shut, just repeating, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." The plane shuddered, and suddenly it tried to climb. The nose pulled up, so fast and so hard that I was pressed deep into my seat, straining against the G-force. The engines were at their absolute maximum, a deafening roar. I looked out the window. For a split second, the clouds parted, and I saw it. It wasn't snow. It wasn't a cloud. It was rock. Grey, jagged rock, laced with snow. It filled the entire window. We were below the peaks. The electronic voice was still screaming, "Terrain, terrain." And then the intercom clicked on. But it wasn't the pilot's calm, measured voice from before. This was a sound I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. It was a man who knew he was about to die. It was the pilot. And he wasn't speaking into the intercom, he was shrieking into it. A raw, guttural sound of pure panic that blasted through the cabin speakers. Brace for impact. That was it. 2 words. There was no time for, put your head between your knees. There was no time for anything. Those 2 words confirmed what the electronic voice and the sight of the mountain already told us. This was the end. The cabin erupted. It wasn't just screaming, it was a physical wave of sound, 150 voices reacting to the certainty of death. I didn't scream. I just pushed my head back against the seat as hard as I could. I saw the flight attendant. She was strapped into her jump seat across the aisle, and her eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, completely frozen. She wasn't even crying. She was just waiting. The impact wasn't a crash. That's the wrong word. It was an explosion. It was an obliteration. The sound, I can't describe the sound. It was the loudest thing I have ever heard. A deafening, metallic shriek of the fuselage tearing apart like it was paper. It wasn't a bang. It was a continuous, deafening grind as the mountain shredded the front of the plane. My entire world became violent, chaotic motion. I wasn't thrown forward. I was slammed sideways and down. My head snapped against the window, and I felt the plastic frame crack against my skull. The force was unimaginable. It wasn't like a car crash. It was like being inside a concrete mixer filled with boulders, falling off a cliff. The G-force was so strong I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like an elephant was standing on it. I could feel the floor beneath my feet buckle and rip away. It was pitch black, but the darkness was filled with screaming, the sound of glass shattering, and the smell of jet fuel. It was everywhere, instantly. That acrid, sharp smell, and cold. A brutal, instantaneous cold that burned my skin. Then I felt a second, massive jolt. This was different. It wasn't a grinding crash. It was a snap. The plane, our plane, broke in half. The section I was in, the tail, tore free from the main fuselage. I didn't know it at the time, of course. All I knew was that the grinding stopped, and we were falling again. But differently. We were tumbling. I was strapped to my seat, but the world was spinning. I saw flashes of white snow through the massive, gaping hole where the rest of the plane used to be. We were sliding, rolling and tumbling down the side of the mountain. Snow and debris were blasting through the cabin. It was like being inside a high-speed avalanche. I heard one final terrible sound, a massive dull thud as we hit a stand of pine trees. The momentum was so great that my seat, 24F, ripped clean off its bolts. I was thrown, still strapped to the chair, into the row in front of me. My head hit. Something hard, metal, I think, and then silence. Absolute, heavy silence. The screaming stopped. The grinding stopped. Everything just stopped. My first conscious thought was, I'm cold. It was a strange, simple, floating thought. The cold was overwhelming. It was in my lungs, in my bones. It was the only thing I could feel. Then the pain hit. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a white-hot, blinding fire. My chest felt like it had been crushed. Every breath was a separate, agonizing decision. I tried to inhale, and it felt like knives were sliding between my ribs and my left leg. I couldn't feel it, and yet it was screaming in agony. I opened my eyes. It was dark, but not completely. A dim, grey light filtered in. I was still strapped into my seat, but the seat was on top of me. I was lying on my side, pinned against the ruptured wall of the fuselage. Snow was pouring in through a massive tear in the metal, covering my face. I spit it out, gasping. I was alive. That thought was so impossible, so absurd that I almost dismissed it. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt my already broken ribs. I tried to move, and a wave of nausea and pain so intense washed over me that my vision blurred. Get up, I told myself. You have to get up. I fumbled with the seatbelt buckle. My fingers were numb, clumsy. I couldn't feel the metal. I tried again, using both hands, jamming my thumb into the latch. It clicked. The belt released, and the full weight of the seat pressed down on me. I yelled, a short, sharp gasp as the pain in my chest exploded. I pushed it off. It clattered onto something in the dark. I was lying in a pile of snow and debris, inside what was left of the cabin. It was unrecognizable. The entire right side of the tail section was gone, ripped open to the mountain. The wind was howling, a low, mournful sound that was so much scarier than the screams. The silence was the worst part. The plane had been full, 154 people, and now there was just the wind. "Hello?" I yelled. My voice sounded weak, pathetic. "Is anybody here?" Only the wind answered. I tried to sit up. I pushed myself up with my arms, and that's when I saw my leg. It was twisted at an angle that legs are not supposed to bend. The bone, my tibia, was visible, a sharp white shard sticking out of my jeans. I threw up. I just leaned over in the snow and was violently sick. The panic I felt was different from the panic during the fall. This wasn't the terror of imminent death. This was the terror of surviving. I was alive, but I was broken, and I was alone on the side of a mountain in a blizzard. I forced myself to look around, to understand what had happened. I was in the last 3 rows of the plane. The fuselage was snapped in half like a broken twig, just a few rows in front of where I had been sitting. Where the rest of the plane should have been, the wings, the cockpit, the other 140-odd passengers, there was just nothing. Just a cliff edge of torn metal, and beyond it the swirling white of the storm. We hadn't just crashed, we had been torn apart. The main body of the plane, the part with the pilots, the part with the engines, was gone. It had hit the mountain face. We, the tail, had been snapped off and had tumbled down the slope. That's why I was alive. I was in the only piece that hadn't been obliterated on impact. And then I heard it. It was quiet. So quiet I thought I was imagining it. A low, painful sound. A moan. I wasn't alone. That sound cut through my panic. It was a compass point. It was a human sound. "Hello," I called out again, louder this time. "I'm here. Where are you?" The moaning came again, from somewhere in the jumbled mess of seats and overhead bins that had collapsed into the front of our severed cabin. It was weak, strained. "Here, please. I'm pinned." I had to move. I looked at my leg. The sight of the bone, my own bone, made the world tilt. I knew if I focused on it, I would pass out. I couldn't pass out. "Don't look," I whispered. "Just move." I grabbed the armrest of a nearby seat, digging my gloved fingers into the fabric, and pulled. The pain was indescribable. It was a white-hot electric shock that started in my leg and exploded in my brain. I screamed, a raw animal sound, but I got myself upright, balancing on my one good leg. My entire world was reduced to that single point of agony. My surroundings came into sharper focus. The tail section was lying on. Its side, tilted at a steep angle. The floor was now a wall, and the wall was the floor. I was in a mangled tube of metal, open to the blizzard, and everything was covered in a thick layer of snow and jet fuel. The smell was suffocating. I hopped, using the seats for support, moving toward the sound. Every jolt sent fire up my leg and through my chest. "I'm coming," I gasped. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she choked out. My legs. I can't feel my legs." I found her. She was 3 rows ahead of where I'd been, in what was now the bottom of the wreckage. An entire row of seats had collapsed on top of her, crushing her from the waist down. Only her head, torso, and one arm were visible. Her face was pale, her lips already turning blue. She was shivering violently. I knelt, my good knee sinking into the snow that already carpeted the cabin floor. "Okay, Sarah, I'm Mark. We're going to get you out." I said it, but my own words sounded hollow. I looked at what was pinning her. It was the entire 3-seat assembly, bent and wedged against the fuselage wall. It must have weighed hundreds of pounds. I was one man, a broken man. I can't breathe," she gasped, her eyes wide with panic. The weight was crushing her. I looked around, frantic. What could I use? A lever? I saw a piece of metal strut, part of the overhead bin support, lying in the snow. I grabbed it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I jammed it under the edge of the seat assembly, trying to find a leverage point. "I'm going to lift on 3, I told her. 1, 2, 3. I put my good foot against a piece of wreckage and threw my entire body into the effort. I roared, a sound of pure exertion and agony. The pain in my ribs was so sharp I saw stars, a white flash behind my eyes. The metal bar bent slightly, but the seats, they didn't move. Not an inch. "Mark," she whispered. Her eyes were looking at me, a terrible, calm understanding in them. "It's no use. Don't say that. I'm going to try again. I just need a better angle." "No, listen." She coughed, a wet, terrible sound that sent a new jolt of fear through me. It's so cold." She was right. The cold was a physical enemy. The wind was whipping snow directly into the cabin, a horizontal blizzard. My clothes were already soaked through from the snow I'd been lying in. Hypothermia was coming for us fast. My hands, which had been bare for only a few minutes, were already stiff and useless. I had to deal with my own injuries fast. I couldn't help her if I bled out or froze. I ripped off the thin wool scarf I was wearing. I looked at my leg, forcing myself to see the wound. I wrapped the scarf as tightly as I could just above the break. I pulled, gritting my teeth until I nearly blacked out. It wasn't a proper tourniquet, but it was all I had. The bleeding seemed to slow, but the pain was now a constant, throbbing drumbeat. I looked back at Sarah. Her shivers were getting worse. We need blankets," I stuttered, my own teeth chattering. I began to scavenge. I was a ghoul in a tomb. I ripped open a carry-on bag I found. Clothes. Just clothes. I found another. More clothes. I grabbed everything I could. Sweaters, coats, anything. I draped them over her, tucking them in as tightly as I could around her shoulders and head, trying to build a cocoon. Where is everyone?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I hadn't let myself look outside. Not really. I limped, dragging my broken leg to the gaping hole at the front of our tail section. I stood at the jagged edge of our survival, holding onto a piece of torn metal. The blizzard was a white wall, but far down the mountain, maybe 200 or 300 yards, there was a light. It wasn't a rescue light, it was an orange, flickering, angry glow. It was a fire. A massive fire, belching black smoke into the white snow. It was the rest of the plane. The cockpit, the wings, the main. Fuselage. It had hit the mountain face and exploded. The fire was raging, consuming everything. There was no one coming from that wreckage. There were no other survivors. The scale of the disaster crashed down on me. It wasn't a crash landing. It was a mid-air disintegration. We were the only two people alive, sitting in a broken piece of metal, in a blizzard, on a mountain that had just claimed over 150 lives. I turned back to Sarah. I couldn't tell her that. I couldn't take away the one thing. We had left. They're down the hill, I lied, my voice cracking. The plane. There's a fire. They'll see the fire. Help is coming. We just have to stay warm. I searched the wreckage around us and found a small miracle. 2 of the thin airline blankets still in their plastic wrap. My fingers were so numb I had to tear the plastic open with my teeth. I sat down next to her, huddling my back against the seats that trapped her, trying to create a shield from the wind. I draped one blanket over her and one over myself, trying to share what little body heat we had. "My daughter," she whispered, her eyes starting to close. "I was going to see my daughter. In Denver. She's waiting for me." "I have a daughter too," I said, my voice thick. "Lily, she's 6. We're going to see them, Sarah. You just have to stay awake, okay? Stay awake with me." I grabbed her hand. It was ice cold. "Squeeze my hand, Sarah. Stay with me." She squeezed faintly. We sat. There, 2 strangers, broken and freezing, in the heart of a tomb. The wind howled around us, and the only other sound in the world was the distant, indifferent crackle of the inferno down the slope. The first night had begun. Night didn't fall. It just consumed us. The dim grey light we had was swallowed by an oppressive, absolute darkness. The blizzard wasn't a storm anymore. It was the entire world. The wind didn't just howl. It shrieked, a high-pitched, relentless sound that seemed to come from inside my own skull. It was the sound of the mountain trying to erase us. My pain settled in. It was no longer a series of sharp shocks. It became a deep, permanent, throbbing ocean of agony. My leg was a useless, heavy weight of pure fire. But my chest was worse. With every ragged breath I drew, my broken ribs felt like they were scraping against my lungs. I had to consciously force myself to inhale, then exhale. It was exhausting. "Mark?" Sarah's voice was a whisper, almost lost in the wind. "I'm here, Sarah. I'm right here. Just talk. We have to talk. Tell me about your daughter." I was shivering so hard my whole body was convulsing, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Her name is Emily," she said, her words slow, slurring slightly. "She's 9. She loves horses. I bought her a book. It's in my bag. A book about a black stallion." "That's great, Sarah, that's great. Lily, my daughter, she likes drawing, flying cars. She drew me a day picture. I was talking as much for myself as for her. The words were a lifeline, a way to prove I was still here, still human. We sat huddled together, our backs against the metal, buried under the thin blankets and random clothes I'd found. They were useless. The cold wasn't just on our skin, it was in us. It was a physical weight, a crushing presence that was leaching the life out of us. I could feel my own movements becoming slow, my thoughts turning to sludge. "It's so dark," she whispered. I looked out the gaping hole. The orange glow from down the mountain, the fire that had been our only landmark, was sputtering. The blizzard was winning, burying the flames in snow. As I watched, the last flickering light winked out, plunging the world into total blackness. The lie I had told her, that the fire would bring help, died with it. My heart sank. That light had been a strange, horrible comfort. It was proof that this had happened, that we weren't just in some cold, personal hell. Now there was nothing, just us and the dark. "It's okay," I said, my voice sounding fake. "They know we're here. They have radar. They know." I was lying to both of us now. I knew a storm like this on these peaks. No one was coming, not tonight, maybe not for days. "I'm sleepy," Sarah murmured. Her head, which had been upright, slumped to the side. "No." My voice was sharp, cracking. "Sarah, no, you can't sleep. You have to stay awake. Talk to me. What's your favorite movie? Tell me." She didn't answer. "Sarah." I shook her shoulder as hard as I could. She moaned, a low, exhausted sound, but her eyes didn't open. A new kind of panic set in, the panic of helplessness. I couldn't move her. I couldn't save her. I was dying right next to her. I had to do something. "Stay here," I said, a stupid, obvious command. I forced myself up again, dragging my leg. The pain was so bright it was almost light. I used my phone's screen for illumination. The battery was at 14%. I had a signal, 1 bar. Then no service. Back and forth. Useless. I scavenged the cabin again, a desperate, freezing madman. I was looking for anything, food, water, more blankets. I found a half-open suitcase, a man's business shirts all neatly folded. I pulled them out and tucked them around Sarah. I found a child's backpack, bright blue with a cartoon dinosaur. It was unzipped, and a small stuffed T-Rex fell out, along with a coloring book. I just stared at it. A kid. There was a kid on this flight. I slammed my fist against the fuselage. The anger was a sudden hot flash that did nothing to warm me. I kept digging. I found a bottle of water. It was frozen solid. A chunk of ice. I found a crushed bag of Doritos, half full. I ripped it open and stuffed a handful into my mouth. The salty, artificial dust was the best thing I had ever tasted. I tried to give some to Sarah, pushing the small chips past her blue lips. "You have to eat, Sarah, please. Wake up," she mumbled. But she didn't chew. She was fading, I knew it. She was slipping into that warm, deadly sleep. I had to fight my own body. Sleep was pulling at me like gravity. My eyelids were lead. It would be so easy. Just close your eyes. The pain would stop. The cold would go away. It would just end. I thought of Lily. I thought of her drawing of the flying car. I thought of my wife, Sarah, waiting at the airport, looking at the departure board, seeing the word delayed, and then cancelled. And then what? I slapped myself. Hard. Across the face. The sting was sharp, real. "Stay awake, Mark. Stay awake." I spent the rest of the night as a sentinel. I would hop around the cabin for a few minutes until the pain in my leg and chest was too much. Then I'd collapse back next to Sarah. I'd check her breathing. It was shallow, too shallow. I'd shake her. I'd talk to her about building my first house, about the color of the sky in summer, about anything. Sometimes she'd moan. Most of the time she didn't. The night lasted an eternity. Every minute was an hour, every hour a lifetime. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the world began to change. The blackness outside didn't just turn to gray, it turned to a pale, ghostly blue. The wind, which had been a constant scream, died down to a low, mournful sigh. The sun was rising. Day 2 was beginning. I dragged myself to the opening and looked out. The storm had passed, and for the first time, I saw where we were. It was horrifying. We were perched on a tiny ledge, a fold in the rock face. Below us was a sheer drop of at least 1,000 feet. Above us was the jagged peak the pilot had screamed about. The mountain was a sea of white, pristine, untouched snow, and the silence was absolute. The fire was gone, buried. There was no smoke. There was no sign of the main wreckage. There was just us, a broken tube of metal, and the endless, beautiful, terrible white. We hadn't just crashed. We had vanished. I turned back to Sarah. Her eyes were open, but they weren't looking at me. They were dull, lifeless, staring at the roof of the cabin. She hadn't shivered once in the last hour. I touched her hand. It wasn't cold. It was frozen. "Sarah," I whispered. "Sarah, the sun is out." The storm broke. She didn't move. She was gone. The cold had taken her while I was watching the sunrise. I wasn't the only survivor. I was just the last one. I was now completely and truly alone. I sat there next to her for a long time. The sun was out. It should have been a comfort, but it wasn't. It was an insult. It was so bright, so cheerful, and it illuminated the absolute devastation of our world. The inside of the cabin was a mess of torn fabric, twisted metal, and frozen, snow-dusted luggage. And Sarah, I couldn't leave her like that. I couldn't. It was the last piece of my humanity. I found the other airline blanket, the one I had been using. My hands were stiff, clumsy claws, but I managed to unfold it. Draped it over her, covering her face, her body. It was a shroud. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." Saying it made it real. The tears came, but they were hot, and they froze instantly on my cheeks, a sharp, stinging pain. The aloneness was a physical weight, heavier than the seats that had pinned her, heavier than the cold. I was the only person on this mountain who knew that 153 other people had died. I was the sole witness to the end of our flight. Day 2 was about one thing: thirst. My mouth was a dry, cracked pit. My lips were splitting. The cold had stolen every drop of moisture from me. I still had the bottle of water I'd found, but it was a solid block of ice. I couldn't break it. I couldn't eat it. I tried to melt it with my body heat, tucking it inside my jacket against my skin. It was agony. The frozen plastic felt like a block of dry ice, burning my skin, stealing what little warmth I had left. It made me shiver so violently that my broken ribs screamed, and after an hour, all I had managed to create was a tiny, useless film of moisture on the inside of the bottle. It wasn't working. The sun. It was bright. I had to use the sun. I dragged myself back to the opening of the fuselage. The view was staggering. The sheer white. The blinding, reflecting glare. My eyes ached instantly. I wedged the bottle of water on a piece of dark metal that was angled toward the sun. It was all I could do. Now, I had to fix my leg. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I took a breath and looked down. The scarf I had used as a tourniquet was frozen stiff, caked in dark, frozen blood. My jeans were rigid. I used my numb fingers to try and assess the damage. The bone was still protruding. The skin around it was an angry, dark purple. It was bad. I knew with a sinking, pragmatic dread that even if I was rescued, I was going to lose this leg. I retightened the scarf. The pain so sharp I almost blacked out again. I was so weak. The single handful of Doritos was long gone. My body was running on nothing. I sat there, propped against the cabin wall, watching the bottle, waiting for single drops of water to form. It was a slow, agonizing process. Drip, drip, drip. After 2 hours, I had maybe a mouthful of the coldest, most life-giving water I had ever tasted. It was nectar. It was everything. That small victory gave me a spark. "They're looking," I told myself. The storm had broken. The sky was clear. This was when the search and rescue would start. They had our flight plan. They knew our route. They would be looking. I spent the rest of day 2 preparing. I had to be seen. I was on a ledge, but the main wreckage, the fire, was gone, buried. They might not see me. I needed a signal. I crawled back through the wreckage. I found Sarah's bag. I winced, feeling like a thief, but I had to. Inside, I found her makeup bag. And inside that, a small, silver-backed mirror. It was perfect. I found the bright blue dinosaur backpack that had belonged to the child. I emptied it, my heart aching. I limped to the opening and jammed it on a sharp piece of metal. a bright, unnatural-looking flag against the white. It wasn't much, but it was something. I sat at the opening, my mirror in hand, and I watched the sky. I scanned the endless blue back and forth until my eyes watered, and the snow blindness made spots dance in my vision. I watched all afternoon. Nothing. Just as the sun began to dip, painting the snow in shades of orange and purple, I heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, distant thrum, a mechanical sound. My heart stopped. I scrambled, dragging my leg, ignoring the pain. "Here!" I screamed, my voice raw. "I'm here! Down here!" I saw it, a dark speck against the setting sun, a plane, a C-130, a search plane, flying a grid pattern. It was high, but it was there. It was real. "I'm here!" I grabbed the mirror. I angled it, trying to catch the last rays of the sun, trying to flash the cockpit. I waved my arms. I screamed, until my throat felt like it was ripping. "Please, look down, I am here!" The plane made a slow, graceful turn, its wings dipping. It was getting closer. My heart was going to burst from my chest. This was it. I was saved. They saw me. I kept flashing the mirror, waving, screaming, "Here, here!" The plane flew on. It completed its turn, and then slowly it just kept going. It followed its grid line, disappearing behind the peak to the west. It didn't see me. It was too high. I was too small. My mirror was a tiny, pathetic speck of light in a sea of blinding white. They didn't see me. I watched it go until the sound faded, until the sky was empty again, and I just broke. The spark I had, the will to fight, it just evaporated. It was all useless. The blue flag, the mirror, the screaming, nothing. I sat there as the second night fell. This time the darkness was even colder. The temperature plummeted. The wind picked back up, a low, cruel whistle through the wreckage. I didn't try to scavenge. I didn't try to stay awake. What was the point? They had been here. They had missed me. They would assume there were no survivors. They would find the main wreckage, eventually, and they would stop looking. Sometime during that second night, I started to hear things. I heard my wife, Sarah, calling my name. "Mark, where are you? You're late." I heard Lily laughing, that high-pitched giggle she always had when I pushed her on the swing. I knew it wasn't real, but it was. Comforting. The third morning, day 3, I didn't even try to get to the water bottle. It was frozen solid again. I didn't care. The thirst was gone, replaced by a dull, heavy apathy. My leg was a distant, dark throbbing. I was so tired. The cold didn't even feel cold anymore. It just felt quiet. I lay down. I pulled the child's dinosaur backpack off the metal strut, and I held it. I curled up in the snow, inside the tomb, and I closed my eyes. It was okay. I was going to see Lily again. It was all going to be okay. I was done. I let go. I don't know how long I was out. It wasn't sleep. It was an absence. A deep, quiet, grey void. I was dreaming, but I was awake. I was in my kitchen. The sun was streaming in. Sarah, my wife, was making pancakes. I could smell the batter, the hot maple syrup. Lily was at the table, humming, colouring in her dinosaur book. "Daddy, you're home," she said, not looking up. "You're late." "I'm sorry, sweetie," I said. "The flight, it was bumpy." "It's okay," Sarah said, turning, her face bright. "You're here now." But there was a noise, a low, rhythmic pounding that was shaking the kitchen. Thump, 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 thump. The windows were rattling. The pancake batter on the griddle was vibrating. "What is that?" I asked. Lily looked up. "It's the giant, Daddy. He's coming." Thump, 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 thump. It got louder. It was inside my head. It was shaking my bones. It was the loudest sound in the world. I opened my eyes. The dream dissolved. The kitchen was gone. I was in the tomb, but the sound was real. It wasn't a giant. It was a helicopter. And it wasn't distant. It was here. It was now. It was so loud it was vibrating the snow, making little puffs of powder fall from the ceiling of the fuselage. It was a physical, violent presence. The apathy, the fog, the comfortable desire to die, it all vanished in a single brutal microsecond. It was replaced by a surge of adrenaline so powerful it felt like an electric shock. I didn't make a decision. My body just reacted. "Here!" I screamed, but my voice was a dry, useless croak. I scrambled to move. I'd been lying down for hours. My good leg was numb. my broken one a solid, unmoving block of agony. I tried to push myself up. My arms were useless, just frozen sticks. I fell back. Whump, 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 whump. It was getting closer. It was almost on top of us. They were here. They had to be here for me. No, 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 don't go, I whimpered. I was crying. Again, but I didn't feel the tears. I stopped trying to use my legs. I just clawed at the snow-covered floor, dragging my body. I was an animal. I was a broken thing, pulling itself toward the light. I hooked my arms on the base of a seat and hauled. The pain in my ribs made me see white, but I didn't stop. I reached the opening. I pulled myself up, my back against the torn metal. The sky was a perfect, piercing blue, and there it was. A big, dark green military helicopter. A Black Hawk. It was so close I could see the rivets on its side. It was maybe 500 yards away, but it wasn't looking at me. It was facing away from me, hovering low over the ridge, farther down the mountain. My heart shattered. They weren't here for me. They were here for the main wreckage, the fire I'd seen. They'd found the black box, the main debris field. They were looking for the 153. They weren't looking for the tail section that had been thrown clear. They weren't looking for me. The helicopter held its position, hovering. A door slid open. They were lowering a man on a hoist, a rescuer in a bright red snowsuit, down to the other site. They were going to leave. "No!" I screamed, the sound ripping my throat. "No, I'm here! Look at me! Look at me!" I waved my arms, my heavy, useless arms. They couldn't see me. I was a shadow inside a dark hole, inside a field of white. The mirror. Where was the mirror? I'd had it. I looked around frantically in the snow I'd been lying in. My hands were so numb I couldn't feel anything. It was like digging with blocks of wood. I felt something small, hard. Sarah's makeup compact. I grabbed it. I couldn't open it. My fingers wouldn't bend. I put it between my teeth and bit, using my jaw to pry it open. The plastic cracked. The mirror fell into my lap. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold it. The sun was bright, directly overhead. I held the mirror up. I didn't know if I was aiming it right. I just flashed. I pointed it at the dark cockpit of the helicopter, and I twisted my wrist back and forth, flash, flash, flash. Please, 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 look. Turn around, just turn around. The helicopter stayed put. The man on the hoist was almost on the ground. This was it. I had seconds. Flash, flash, flash. I'm alive. And then it moved. It stopped lowering the rescuer. The helicopter's nose, which had been pointed away, suddenly turned. It pitched a sharp, sudden bank and came straight toward me. It saw me. Oh my God, it saw me. The helicopter closed the distance in seconds. It was deafening now, a triumphant, terrifying roar. The wind from its rotors was a hurricane, blasting the snow out of the fuselage, stinging my face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It hovered maybe 50 feet above the opening of the tail section. The massive side door was open. Men in helmets were looking down at me, their faces masks of pure, unfiltered shock. They were pointing. They couldn't believe it. One of them gave me a thumbs up. A second rescuer, this one in an orange suit, was at the door hooking onto the hoist. He started to descend. He was a god. He was an angel in a harness, coming down from the sky. He landed in the snow, just outside the wreckage, and scrambled in. He was young, his face red from the cold, his eyes wide. He ripped off his goggles. "My God!" he yelled over the sound of the rotors. "Sir, we thought there were no survivors. The C-130 missed you. We were just checking the main site." I couldn't speak. I just pointed at my leg. "Okay, sir, okay, we're getting you out of here. My name is Alex. You're going to be okay." He was already working, pulling a medical kit from his vest. He saw Sarah, covered by the blanket. He paused, his face grim. Is there anyone else?" I just shook my head. "I'm the only one," I whispered. "You're not," he said, his voice firm, as he expertly strapped a new professional tourniquet to my leg, cinching it tight. "Not anymore." He wrapped me in a silver thermal blanket. He clipped a huge, heavy-duty harness around my chest. The adrenaline was gone, and the blackness was swimming back into my vision. The pain, which had been gone for a minute, returned with a vengeance. "I'm going to pass out," I told him. "You can," he said, clipping my harness to his. "I've got you. You did it, man. You survived." He gave the signal to the hoist operator above. A sharp tug. I felt my body, for the first time in 3 days, lift off the floor of that frozen hell. I was rising up out of the wreckage into the cold, clean, impossible air. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the mountain. It was vast, white, and terrible, and I was leaving it. Waking up was a slow, chemical crawl out of a deep, warm fog. The first thing I registered wasn't sound, but a smell. It wasn't the sharp, acrid scent of jet fuel or the metallic tang of blood. It was clean, antiseptic, soap, and something vaguely like lemon. Polish? My second sensation was that I wasn't cold. I was warm, impossibly, wonderfully warm. I was under blankets, but they were heavy and soft, not the thin, useless airline blankets from the wreck. I opened my eyes. The light was dim, artificial, and yellow, not the blinding, hostile white of the sun on snow. I was in a room, a hospital room. The steady, rhythmic beep of a machine next to me was the only sound. I tried to move, and a wave of pain, dull and aching, radiated from my leg. But it was different. It wasn't the white-hot spike of broken bone. It was a managed, distant throb. I looked down. My left leg was gone. From the knee down, there was just a large, thick, sterile white bandage. I stared at it. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel grief. I felt a strange, logical calm. Of course, I thought, that makes sense. I had known I would lose it. It was the price. I had paid it. I was alive. I turned my head. Sitting in a chair, asleep, her head resting on her arms. On the side of my bed was my wife, Sarah. My breath hitched. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a hallucination in the snow. This was real. I was here. She was here. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, dry. It came out as a cracked whisper. "Sarah?" Her head snapped up. Her eyes were red, swollen, and puffy from days of crying. When she saw me, saw my eyes open and looking at her, her face crumpled. It was a look of such profound, agonizing relief that it broke my heart. "Mark," she cried, a T-E sound that was half sob, half shout. She lunged forward, grabbing my hand, covering it with both of hers, pressing it to her cheek. "Oh my God, Mark, you're awake, you're here. We thought, oh God." She couldn't finish. She just wept, her shoulders shaking, her tears hot on my cold hand. I didn't have the strength to squeeze back, so I just lay there and let her cry. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm home. I'm okay." A doctor came in, then nurses. They were kind, professional. They told me I was at Denver General. I had been in surgery for 8 hours. My leg had been amputated below the knee due to severe frostbite and the compound fracture, which was badly infected. I had 3 broken ribs, a concussion, a fractured clavicle, and severe hypothermia and dehydration. I was, they said, unbelievably lucky. Lucky. That word. It sounded obscene. My wife finally calmed her sobs enough to speak. "Lily," she said, her voice thick. "She's at my sister's. She doesn't know. We told her you were just delayed. How could I—" "Mark, what happened?" And so I had to tell her, but the words wouldn't come. I tried to say the plane, but I couldn't. How could I describe the sound, the scream, the cold? How could I tell this warm, safe woman in this clean, warm room about Sarah, about the woman who died next to me? "There was a crash," I managed. My wife's face tightened. "Mark, how many?" I just looked at her. I didn't have to say the number. She saw it in my eyes. "The news," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "They've been outside the hospital for a day. They're calling it a miracle. They're calling you." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The next few days were a blur of pain medication, surgeries, and sleep. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain, it was the guilt. It settled on me, a heavy, cold blanket that was worse than the snow. A man from the NTSB came, a kind-looking gentleman with tired eyes. I told him everything. I told him about the turbulence, the sound of the engines, the lurch. I told him about the terrain alarm, and I told him about the pilot's final, terrified words. When I said, "Brace for impact," the man closed his eyes and just nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed his worst fear. He told me what they'd found. The main wreckage, where the fire had been, was the cockpit and the first 20 rows. It had hit the mountain face at over 300 miles per hour. Death, he said, was instantaneous for everyone in that section. The tail section, my section, had snapped off on initial impact. It had tumbled nearly half a mile down a steep, snow-filled ravine which had cushioned the final impacts. We found the other passenger, he said gently. Sarah, the woman you were with. Her injuries. Mark, she never would have made it, even if you had gotten her free. You stayed with her. You did everything you could. I just nodded, but his words were no comfort. I had lived. She had not. Why? Because I was in 24F and she was in 21C? Because my seat broke free and hers was crushed? It was a lottery, a cruel, random lottery of physics and metal fatigue. My wife brought Lily to see me. I had dreaded it. I was a monster. I was missing a part of my body. I was pale, bruised, broken. She stood in the doorway, holding her mother's hand, her eyes wide, looking at the bandages, the tubes. Daddy? She whispered. Hey, sweetie, I said, forcing a smile. I told you I'd be home. I'm sorry I'm late. She ran to me. She didn't care about the leg. She just scrambled up onto the bed and threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. I missed you, Daddy. You missed 2 stories. I held my daughter for the first time, and I was the one who was crying. I was shaking with the force of it. I was alive. I was holding my child. But when I closed my eyes, I didn't see her. I saw the child's dinosaur backpack in the snow. I saw Sarah's lifeless, open eyes. The world outside called me a hero, a miracle, the sole survivor of Flight 417. The media was a pack of wolves outside the hospital doors. They wanted the story. They wanted the gory details. They wanted to know what it felt like. I was a hero for what? For sitting in the right seat? For failing to save the one other person who survived the fall? For stealing a dead woman's mirror? I wasn't a hero. I was just the one who hadn't died. And I had no idea. Why? It's been 6 months since I left the mountain, but the mountain has never for 1 second left me. I'm in a room that smells like rubber mats and antiseptic. Physical therapy. At 38 years old, I am learning how to walk again. One more, Mark. Push through it. Leo, my physical therapist, is relentlessly positive. I hate it, but I need it. I push my weight onto my new leg. It's a masterpiece of carbon fiber and titanium, a $20,000 piece of machinery that connects to my knee. It is not my leg. It's a tool. It's a high-tech pylon I'm strapped to. I take a step, wobbling, my hands white-knuckled on the parallel bars. I think about my daughter, Lily. She learned to do this in a single afternoon when she was 1. It's been 6 months and I still can't walk to the car without a cane. I came home, but I am not the man who left for Seattle. That man died on the mountain. This new man, the one who sits in his place, is a ghost. He doesn't sleep. The NTSB report said the sound of the impact was instantaneous. They're wrong, I hear it every night. It's the sound of metal tearing, a sound that shakes the foundation of my house. I don't go to meetings. The sound of a fire alarm, a car backfiring, even a dropped pan in the kitchen sends me to the floor, my heart trying to escape my chest. The old Mark was a pragmatic architect. This new Mark is a collection of exposed nerves. I can't be in a crowd. I can't be in a small space. And I can never, ever fly again. My company was supportive. Take all the time you need. I tried, I really did. 3 weeks ago I drove to the Denver airport. I just sat in the parking garage watching the planes. I saw a 737, the same model as Flight 417, lift gracefully into the sky. My hands started shaking so violently I couldn't hold the steering wheel. I had to pull over on the drive home to be sick. The world has become very small. It's my house, this therapy room, and the backyard. The final report was released last month. It's all there in cold technical prose. Controlled flight into terrain. Spatial disorientation due to the whiteout. Pilot error. They found the cockpit voice recorder, the black box. They have the audio. They have the electronic shriek of terrain, terrain. They have the pilot's final 2-word scream. But I'm the human black box. The recorder captured the sound, but it didn't capture the feeling. It didn't record the smell of jet fuel so thick it made you gag. It didn't record the sight of Sarah's lifeless eyes open and staring. It didn't record the sheer terrible silence of that first morning. They have the data. I have the memory. I am the one who has to live with the face of the flight attendant, her eyes wide, just waiting for the end. I'm the one who remembers the weight of that little boy's dinosaur backpack. I've been in therapy, the other kind. The kind where you talk. My therapist, she's kind. She says I have to stop asking, why me? Why did I survive? Why did my seat, 24F, break free while the one in front of it was pulverized? Why was I spared when that little boy with the backpack and 152 other people weren't? There is no answer. It wasn't skill. It wasn't strength. It was physics. It was random, brutal, meaningless chance. Don't ask why me, the therapist says. Ask what now. That is the only question that matters. I have this life. It was given back to me at a cost I can't comprehend. I can't waste it. I can't spend the rest of my days as a ghost. So I go to therapy. I learn to walk. I take my daughter to the park. I sit on the bench. I don't just watch her. I see her. I see the way the sun catches her hair as she runs. I listen to the sound of her laugh, that high-pitched giggle, and I memorize it. I hold my wife's hand and I feel the texture of her skin. These are the things. The only things. I was the only one who came back from that mountain, but there are other stories like mine. Other stories of impossible survival, of people who stared into the void and by some miracle the void blinked. If you want to understand what it means to truly be alive, you have to understand what it's like to have it all taken away in an instant. Thank you for listening to my story. Subscribe and I will bring you more. More stories of the impossible, more stories of survival.